All right, I think we'll get things kicked off. So thanks to one and all for attending today's webinar entitled Slash Your Rack Maintenance Costs by 85%. We'll talk about some proven strategies to reduce downtime and preserve your revenue. So with that, I am Marc Rousseau. I head up the National Accounts team. Great picture. I now have a beard. So for those that are wondering if there's an actual live person talking, yes, that is me. You should be able to to see what I look like. Here you go. So we'll get ourselves kicked off with the presentation material today, and I welcome certainly questions to be asked by all that are attending today. I know this will be content that should certainly provoke some questions, so we're anxious for folks to participate and for us to answer those questions on the back end. So with that, so that's us, Damotech. Been in the business now over 35 years, leading the rack safety industry. Our engineers have inspected thousands of warehouses across in America, and you'll certainly see some additional stats as we make our way through the presentation. But every year, our engineering staff inspects 2,000, they conduct 2,000 inspections averaging over 125 million square feet per year. And some of those logos there are customers that we actively support and that count us as their rack safety partner. So annual inspections by the numbers. So as we look at what we perform on an annual basis, 150,000 bays that are inspected. And a bay for us is basically the volume between two uprights. So regardless of the number of beam levels that you might have, regardless of how deep that location might go, a bay for us is just that volume between two uprights. So we inspect on an annual basis 150,000 of those, and we've identified 441,000 issues. Of those 441,000, 55,000 are categorized as high priority issues. In other words, that we're requiring a prompt action, a maintenance plan be put in place to address those. And of all of those, 7,500 require immediate unloading of the affected bay. So that kind of gives you a sense of, when you engage with a third party expert to come in and do the work, you wonder sometimes if it's worth the amount of money that you might spend or having an outside party do the work. But when you think of 7,500 bays that are now required to be unloaded on an annual basis from all the warehouses that we inspect, it really is something fairly telling. And what's important about all this is that each out of service bay comes with fairly costly consequences. So there's a poll that we're going to run. The question being, if you've suffered unexpected rack downtime, what was the biggest impact? Of course, answer number one, loss of revenue. Answer number two, operational delays. Three, lack of inventory space, or four, all of the above. So I'm going to launch the poll. I'm going to ask everyone to do the right thing and perform the poll. We'll give it a couple minutes. It should be launched now. So please answer what you think best applies to your particular situation. Again, if you've suffered unexpected rack downtime, what was the biggest impact? A loss of revenue, operational delays, a lack of inventory space, or all the above? All right, we're great. We're getting great participation, so that's really, really cool. Give it a couple more seconds as folks do their best to share how they view these kinds of things. All right, so no, we're doing pretty well. A couple more seconds here for the last bit of participants to chime in. All right, so I think we're good. We're good. We got 95% participation rate, so that's really, really good. We're gonna go ahead and end the poll, and we're gonna share the results. So you should be able to see this now. So 41% of respondents said all of the above. So in other words, that there's a loss of revenue, operational delays, and a lack of inventory space. Uh, in a tied position, actually, a lack of inventory space is the one that seemed to be most concerning to folks, with the second spot being operational delays and the last spot being a loss of revenue. So we're going to stop sharing those results, but very interesting that almost half of you saw all three of those elements kind of being the most impactful of the options being chosen. So we're going to cancel out of this. So let's continue moving on with the presentation. So rack damage, as I've already mentioned, really translates to having bays that are just unusable. So rack damage is a recurring issue. So one damaged upright can take out an entire bay. So because you want to do the right thing, right? I mean, if you've got a 30-foot tall rack bay with 5 beam levels, just like the one we see in the picture there, and you have damage, even if it's a foot off the ground, that damage, if significant enough, would need to cause that bay to be put out of service. So, and we all, based on the past options that we spoke about, that causes idle storage space, an increased operational bottleneck. And any of you who distribute food or beverages or in a retail space, and you're getting ready for Christmas peak, I think you can all sympathize with the folks out there that are having to contend with putting their bays out of service and then having to live through the disruption. And if you're a 3PL, it's even worse. So we talked about idle storage, operational bottlenecks, the labor disruption from your folks now, being faced with some of those things, and of course, which is in many cases the most egregious of all these things, is a potential loss of revenue. So we think about the formula: an upright gets hit, we put that bay out of service, and then we have some potential lost dollars. Now, we did a study a couple years ago with a 3PL partner of ours, and they shared some information about their operation. So this is a national cold storage 3PL, so we're talking freezer environment. And they had in one of their freezers, I think it was freezer C, they had freezers A through F, and freezer C had a few hundred bays in it. And following an inspection, we determined that 10 of those bays needed to be put out of service because of the significance of the rack damage there. So if we make our way through the formula, a hit or damage caused 10 bays to be put out of service. I move my way to the right. And if you're replacing an upright, which is the right thing to do, right? There's nothing wrong with replacing a component. That's you want to do the right thing, get that thing swapped out. With an OEM lead time of 9 weeks and at $600 in lost revenue per week per bay, that amounts to $54,000 in lost revenue. Again, in a bay, in this particular instance, so we're talking 5 beam levels at 2 pallet positions each, $600 per week in lost revenue. When you do the math, and every week it takes for that new upright to be manufactured and shipped, adds to the overall lost revenue that we're feeling. So that's why we try to make these things about safety, because that's the topmost issue that we want to ensure that we address. But I think we have to be mindful of the fact that in many types of operations, 3PLs especially, and in some cases, other industries, there's a true loss of revenue that comes with having those bays be put out of service. But understandably, if you're attending today's call and you're not a 3PL, out of service bays can still lead to other things. So there's managerial stress, and operational disruption. I mean, again, you're putting bays out of service, so you're having to put that freight somewhere else, right? And not all warehouses have a bunch of floor space available to them that's excessive, or that can handle that excess freight. You're going to have remediation work because you're going to want to address the problem. And it goes without saying that there's a financial cost. So beyond the lost revenue that I spoke about before, even if you're not a 3PL, you're going to have to fix that damage. So having those out of service bays really does, add to the anxiety that a facility can have to contend with. Now, based on our stats, and we've been doing this now for well over a decade, so 12 years, being a rack safety provider throughout North America, and having covered over 1.1 billion square feet of warehouse space, we found with our data that 10% of racking bays will have a high priority issue associated with it. And up to half of these will have to be unloaded immediately. So when you think of, hey, was it worthwhile again bringing an expert in? That's a ton of high priority issues, and the fact that half of those have to be unloaded and be put out of service is awfully consequential. Now, when you're faced with rack damage, and if you look to the picture on the right, you can kind of see that damaged horizontal brace at the very bottom, and it's kind of tough to see, but there's actually a damaged column on the front there. So that bay has to be put out of service. Now, there are four options available to us, or four choices that we have when trying to deal with damage like that. So first and foremost, we can ignore it, which is oddly enough the most common result or choice that folks take. And it's like, hey, I've been in the business 20 years. Do I really need to unload or do anything with that particular bay? It's been sitting up now for umpteen months. Maybe I just need to ignore it. So we do see that quite a bit. We have folks in choice number two that try to do the right thing. They are well-meaning, they have a maintenance staff, and for a longest time, history and tradition was, let me just go get my welder and my maintenance team, and I'm going to do an in-house fix or an in-house weld. Choice number three, which is very common as well, and something that we strongly encourage folks to do, is just replace the component entirely. And then the final choice, and one that we're going to talk a bit more about throughout the presentation, is rack repair. So dig deeper into the weeds when we look at these various options. Option number one, I'm ignoring the damage, but what's the cost of that? Now, I know in Canada we tend to have different jurisdictional authorities. Like Quebec will have its safety organization. In Ontario, they'll have the Ministry of Labor, and in BC, they'll have their own. In the States, it's OSHA that is the predominant forcing function to cause folks to kind of, hate to say it, but do the right thing when it comes to worker safety. And a couple of years ago, OSHA launched what they call a National Emphasis Program. So that's the NEP acronym that you see on the screen. And that was launched because they found that the warehousing and distribution industry had a 2.7 time more frequent, I would say, cause for injuries throughout the workplace environment. So the warehouse and warehousing industry is 2.7 times more prone to injury than other industries. So they launched this national emphasis program, which now affords them the legal authority to walk into a place. And if they were called in because the fire exit is encumbered with a bunch of boxes. So the OSHA inspector shows up, said, hey, I got a call and somebody was complaining about the fire exit being encumbered. They'll go assess that encumbrance. But now with the NEP, they could pivot and now say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go have a look at your racking. So having damage to your racking and ignoring it, I think it just invites scrutiny, and it invites folks to potentially, want to either assess a fine or a violation to the situation that you're faced with. So ignoring the damage can result in fines, lawsuits, or even potential accidents. But what else? So are there other costs to ignoring damage? And there's a litany of things that our team has come up with, from the OSHA fines that I spoke about, the additional liability that you may have been exposed to. Maybe your insurance provider now is made aware of some of these things, and your insurance rates go up. There's obviously, for emergency repairs, the risk to worker safety. higher claim costs, diminished facility throughput, all of these things, and the list is fairly exhaustive, are a result of potentially ignoring the damage that we have in our warehouses. Option number two, and again, folks are well-meaning. They know they have a damage that they want to address it, and we'll see folks do the work like we see in the picture to the left there. So it's in-house fixes and welds. Now, we always look to the code for guidance on what we should and should not do. And the code is kind of funny. I mean, the code does not say, thou shall not perform, any in-house welding. It's just you just have to be awfully cognizant of the different requirements to perform that in-house work. So first and foremost, it's got to be done by a certified welder. I think that goes without saying. It has to be following some engineered design. There has to be an engineering oversight that ensures that the right thing is being welded under the right conditions, and that it's then been looked after the fact to ensure that the weld actually took hold, that the bead of weld was properly done, it took hold, and it's performing the task of restoring the structural integrity of the damaged component. So we want to make sure that if we are doing this, that we're doing it the right way. But I think we're just introducing a lot of potential uncertainties when we try to do something in the field with field welding. And I think it'll just invite additional scrutiny from OSHA if they were to come in and have a look at the work that was done. So that was for option number two. And some of the hazards and outcomes and hidden costs from in-house welding are on the screen. And I've touched on these a little bit already. There's the fire hazard, there's the weak weld, which I spoke about. And of course, doing this in a freezer environment, especially with certain chemicals, depending on if you have, depending on the types of coolant that you're using throughout the slab, all of these things present a potential hazard when we're doing welding. So there could be a structural weakening of the component. I talked about the additional OSHA scrutiny, and of course, the fact that these may not meet codes and standards. Some of the hidden costs of doing in-house welding, again, there could be a risk of fines. Insurers may not be all that keen on doing that work in-house. So things we want to think about as we introduce option number two being in-house work and in-house welding. Option number three is one that is very common. And then I tell you, as much as our business focuses on inspections and doing low capacity assessments and rack repair, we're a strong proponent of folks doing the right thing and replacing the damaged upright. So some things you have to contend with, and things that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, is the fact that there are higher lead times with doing component replacement. Now, some OEMs out there have come down considerably in their lead times. I remember post-COVID, lead times for some uprights were north of 22, 24 weeks. Those have come down some, but not all of them can kick out product at 10 to 12 weeks lead time. So we do want to be mindful of the time it takes to fix something. So if you remember a few slides ago, we talked about that 3PL example and the costs associated with having a damaged component and having that bay put out of service. So every week an additional lead time, in that particular example, was generating $6,000 of lost revenue. So think about your situation and how that lead time is important to your particular predicament. So we have major disruption, obviously, that comes involved with this. And I think most notably, we have to unload the location, dismantle the beams and the upright, and then when everything is swapped in, reassemble and reload all that freight that we had to remove to begin with. And I think another interesting example is that rack is still unprotected from future damage. So the problem with replacing racks, and it's kind of a vicious cycle, we're going to damage the upright, and then we're going to replace it because we're doing the right thing, and we're not going to ignore it. We're going to replace that component, but it's just a matter of time before that location gets re-damaged once again, and then we're replacing it and we're damaging it. And all of that leads to cost and time. Cost to replace the component, and time and aggravation to perform all that work. Now, option number four, and as we had those four choices, we had the ignore, we had the in-house welding, we had number three, which we just spoke about, which was replacing the component. But number four is something that has a really clean and obvious value proposition if you take the time to break out the significant components of it. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the before picture. So I have an upright that was damaged. It was run into by a forklift operator. And on the right, we have what happens when you replace it with a rack repair solution. But I would tell you, not all rack repair solutions are made the same. You want to ensure that if you go and side with somebody that does rack repair, that it's an engineered solution. They have to be able to demonstrate that it was engineered, and they have the documentation to provide to back all that up. It's got to restore load capacity. I mean, there's absolutely no point in having a repair done just to have your load capacity get a haircut because of the type of repair that was done. You want to maintain the original configuration of the racking with that repair. And because of the concerns that we spoke about earlier on the welding, you want to avoid field welding to the extent possible because it adds just a bunch of uncertainty and variables that we have to contend with. You want to go for a bolted solution. And of course, because most of these processes are done in a very efficient fashion, you want to minimize the impact to operation. So those are the kind of the five key building blocks and things you want to ask of your rack repair solution provider. So we'll look through a couple examples here of a replacement option versus doing a rack repair. So when you do a quick comparison, upright versus permanent repair, we'll often see the delivery of the upright replacement, as I mentioned before, being much longer than a permanent rack repair, like the one Damotech does. Downtime, there's significant downtime resulting from unloading a rack replacement option versus doing the much quicker repair that comes with a rack repair solution. Just to give you an example, replacing an upright can be 4 to 6 hours depending on how many beam levels we have. Whereas for a rack repair, a 24-inch kit like the one we see on the screen on the right-hand side takes between 30 to 45 minutes. So think about, whether, time and money and disruption are things that are important to you or not. And then, of course, there's the installation piece, which I just spoke about, and then the repeat damage. Go back to the previous screen where we had that vicious cycle of damage and replace, damage and replace. Those are the kind of things that you have to think about when you do a rack replacement, because it's just a matter of time before that location gets re-impacted, and you're having to now replace that particular component. Whereas the right kind of repair solution, like the ones we tend to offer, will have a built-in protection and a lifetime warranty against impact. But the numbers really speak for themselves. So before I kind of gave you some high-level items. So on the left-hand side is the replacement option that we've been comparing with. So in this particular case, a 30-foot tall upright, double posted in the front, double posted in the back. So, and that'll retail for about $320 and sometimes more if it's structural, but this is roll formed. Your freight at $1,280, your rental costs, your unloading labor, your dismantling labor, and of course the installation labor itself. And that totals $2,275 for that one upright location. Compare that again to the right side of the screen, which is putting in our 24-inch Damo Pro repair kit. And we say 24-inch because the bulk of the damage, in our experience, happens within the first couple feet of an upright. It's that outrigger that's running into the front post of an upright. So those are the things that cause us to most often quote a shorter repair kit. I've got my freight. I got to ship the component. I don't have to rent any equipment because all of our techs come with with our patented lifting device. I'm not having to unload because I'm just doing a front repair, and most of our repairs can be done with virtually no unloading. I'm not dismantling anything. Any installation labor is there, so a little bit less than what we have on the left-hand side of the screen because our guys are so much faster at performing the work. So the subtotal for the repair side is 1,025. So in the first year, I spent $2,200 and some change to do my rack replacement. And on the right side, I did a repair and I'm just over $1,000. But the real difference comes in that, again, that cycle of damage and replace, damage and replace. So over a 10-year span, we're expecting at least another two rack replacements because of the frequency of damage that is going to be expected to happen at that location. So over 10 years, on the left-hand side, I'm spending just north of $6,800, whereas on the right side, my kit is taking a beating. It's guaranteed for life against impact, and I'm still at that $1,000 spend. So if you do the quick math, the savings between $6,800 and 6,825 minus my $1,000, I'm at $5,800 in savings, and that's how we get to 85% savings by performing the right sort of rack repair. So we're not making up the math. I mean, I would challenge anybody to dispute some of the dollars that we have there. Not every configuration is the same, but I think our math will hold up to scrutiny as we compare what it might cost you all to replace a damaged upright versus having to repair it with one of our proven solutions. So Damotech repair kits, I'm going to keep on saying it, stamped and backed by our in-house engineers. I think it's important to know that you want to vet the repair solution that you decide to side with. Go with somebody that's been doing this for some time that could stand behind their work. In our particular case, Damotech's components or rack repair solutions ship in 2 weeks. We require minimal to no unloading to perform the repair. It's an engineered permanent solution. It comes with a lifetime warranty against impact, and we mean that. So if we install one of our kits and it's done by a certified installer as it's supposed to be, and you run into our kit and damage it in some way, shape, or form, maybe you shear the anchors, we'll replace that component free of charge. The fact that it fits all racking styles available on the market, and we've seen countless styles of uprights out there that have to be fixed. We'll restore the load capacity. We avoid field welding. It's done in under an hour. And finally, which again, I think is important to note, it's compliant with industry standards. So as I'm recapping this, when facing rack damage, you fundamentally have four choices. The ones on the left that we want to avoid, ignoring it to begin with, not a good thing. It's not like sweeping this under the carpet will make this go away. Damage does not go away. There's no point in ignoring it. Just tackle it. Doing in-house fixes and welds. I'm hoping I've convinced you out there, for those that do in-house work, that you're rethinking whether it's the right thing to do or not. So avoid the pitfalls and the uncertainty and the risks and variables of doing an in-house fix and weld, because it could just lead to future problems that I've already spoken about quite a bit. And then do what's right on the right-hand side. Do that replacement of the component and seriously consider the value proposition of rack repair. I think we put in some pretty convincing arguments that the economics hold over long term, even in the short term. Having rack repair done can be a really, really cool option for folks that are trying to do the right thing. A little subtle hint there as to what the four choices are and what might decide to kind of, lead the way. So if you're ready to reduce your maintenance costs, I would encourage you to reach out to us so we can help you kind of get through it. I've talked a lot about rack repair, but we're really more than just that. We've been servicing the rack industry now for well over 35 years. We're an integrated solutions provider, clearly the largest in North America. Beyond just repairs, we do third-party audits. Well, we do load capacity assessments for folks that are needing that service because load capacities have to be current and they have to be posted in accordance with the building code. And we'll do training as well for folks out there that just don't know where to start, whether they think they have what it takes to be able to identify rack damage and rack safety issues. We're happy to train your folks on the ground to be able to do just that. I spoke about our repair solutions, but there's also protection solutions that are available for folks that want to get ahead of the damage and ensure that their assets are protected. And then we also have a Damotech platform, which is the web portal that we use for the communication of our rack safety engineering offerings. So it's something that I think you should go consult on our website, and it's something that you might find interesting as you look to get on this journey for rack safety. So next steps that you might have, let our experts help you to evaluate whether you have high priority issues, that you understand the level of risk associated with some of those issues. Get some expert recommendations on what to do and how to tackle those high priority issues. And I think just avoid the unnecessary downtime. I think we made some really compelling arguments around the economics of having a bay that's put out of service, having to wait weeks on end to have that component be replaced versus having it be quickly repaired with one of our engineered solutions. And of course, unnecessary downtime. If you're not a 3PL and you're not losing revenue per se, there's still the disruption factor. There's still the idea of having to put that freight elsewhere, and there's still unsafe conditions that you should be looking after as you look to address things. So there's a QR code there that you can scan to have a free damage assessment. There, of course, there's no obligation. There's no pressure. We're just here to provide insight as experts in the industry. There are additional resources that you can download from our website to better understand some of the takeaways, the tips, and some other resources that are easy to read. And you could also fill out an assessment online. So you could kind of self-grade yourself to see whether you are on the low end of the spectrum, needing a whole lot of help, or maybe you're further well off on the spectrum, but still needing some other additional tips for us to help out with. So with that, we talked about how the free assessment is available, but there's also a Q&A that we could look at. So we'll certainly entertain some questions here. Here's one here. What happens if we have multiple rack brands in one facility? Can Damotech still help? The question is absolutely we can help. We very much cater to all different rack styles and stuff because it's rare nowadays. I would tell you if a warehouse just has one rack style in there, you may have structural uprights, in your freezer, but in your dry goods or cooler, maybe you'll have, roll form types of uprights. So we'll be able to fix all of those with our patented solution so that you'll be able to get back and up and running in record time. Are repairs possible in freezers? Absolutely. I spoke about the pitfalls of doing, welding in a freezer environment. Because we use a bolted solution, it's a great way to address the need. So absolutely, the answer is yes, that we could perform repairs in a freezer environment. Another one here. If an engineer from Damotech comes to our warehouse, can they help us know which damage needs attention first? And I would tell you, absolutely. Our engineers, and we have 50 engineers on staff. So that's 50 engineers that travel across North America performing audits and load capacity assessments for our various customers. And I think you want to be able to triage your issues in a way where hey, am I faced with damage that is critical, or is it something that I can leave for another day because it doesn't really rise to the occasion? Having an expert come in to address those things, I think, is an important part of the equation. And hiring an expert to help you sort through those various issues is a big thing. So I'm going to continue looking on for some other questions, just a couple more. Um, as here, do you offer recurring inspections or are they just one-offs? I would tell you the industry standard is to do annual inspections. It's not to say that you have to, but depending on the environment that you're in, if you're distributing at a really quick pace, that the velocity of your product removal, the velocity of your forklifts, drivers, if it's one that's at a decent clip, you really will want to look at things being done on an annual basis with even some self-inspections of your own on a periodic basis. And when we talked about training your warehouse workers to how to perform their own self-inspections, even the periodic just touch point to see, do I have anything really bad going on, is an important part of the equation. But if you're in an industry where maybe you don't have that velocity, then maybe doing an inspection every couple of years is going to be suitable for your needs. How can I get a free damage assessment? Well, the QR code there is one you can scan, and it'll allow you to see whether we can come out and assess your the damage at your site. Now, if you're looking at the economics of your rack repair situation, I know folks are wondering, hey, are you using in-house folks? So in the dollars that we shared, and I'm happy to have an offline conversation about this, but in the numbers that we shared, we were assuming in-house laborers that are doing the install or the labor work, and those have a cost. No business that I know of are folks just sitting down or sitting around idly. So there is an in-house cost that has to be achieved, and there's a burden whether you're asking an outside third party or using some of your own workers to do the work. So we have a couple more questions that were asked. I'm going to see what else I can get to here. Do you conduct rack inspection training? And is it done in person or webinar? So it's actually both. Today we do, it's like a 2.5 hour semi deep dive on how to do an inspection. I mean, you're not going to be as trained as our engineers, certainly as we perform that training, but it'll give your folks a really, really good impression of what things to do, and what things to focus on when you're performing your own self-inspection. So we do that via Teams or Zoom, but we could also deploy to site and do something a bit more hands-on. But I would tell you the vast majority of our customers have us do a remote training of their people. And there's a question about installation guidelines, and if there's some things I would encourage, Stephanie to reach out to us afterwards. We'll happily, give you some pointers on the installs that have to be done, whether it's just an upright or if it's to consider having some of our folks come in to do rack repair work itself. So I think those are the major questions that we saw. Thank you so much for your time, and look, I hope we'll get a chance to talk again on the back end. Thank you for sharing some of your questions with us, and certainly wish you a nice rest of the day. Take care, folks.